Okay, welcome again to this public sector broadcast. My name's Tim G, I'm the sales manager here at Rizhul. I'm really pleased to be interviewing today Lee Bingham, who's our Director of Retail at Rizhul. We're going to be talking about digital channel shift and digital impact in retail, and essentially looking at retail as a blueprint for public sector services. Okay, so welcome again to this public sector broadcast. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Lee Bingham, who's actually our Retail Director here at Rizhul. We're going to be talking about digital channel shift in retail and effectively how that digital channel shift and the learnings that we get from that can affect potentially public sector. I've got lots of questions for you today, Lee.
Sounds good, Tim.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
But before we start, would you be good enough to just give us an intro to yourself and how you've ended up at Rizhul?
Absolutely. So, hello everybody, my name is Lee Bingham. So I'm the Director of Retail at Rizhul. I've recently joined the business from my former role, so I was previously CIO at Paul Smith.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, Paul Smith is a fashion and apparel business, approximately 1,000 seats in size, globally dispersed, £220 million turnover. I used to manage an IT team of cross-competency of around 40 staff, so split between obviously UK, Europe and the US. Yeah. Lots of kind of longevity in terms of our relationship with Rizhul. So Rizhul were previously our Microsoft partner for some 12 years, so lots of longevity and great experience in terms of our Microsoft strategy. Paul Smith were obviously a reference account for both Rizhul and Microsoft. So we were fortunate enough to be able to kind of deliver some really innovative technology projects, some great adoption projects, and some really kind of some nice technology and delivery projects in the realm of sort of Microsoft technologies.
And such a well-known brand.
Absolutely, yeah.
And worldwide known as well,
Yeah, definitely. So again, great industry, so fashion, apparel and obviously retail, hence my experience in terms of the actual industry and the vertical. Lots and lots of kind of, lots of technology, lots of really kind of innovative retail drivers into the industry and the sector. So yeah, really exciting industry.
And the thing that, I love the Paul Smith stuff, as you know, I've sat here with my pen.
Absolutely.
And a number of my clothes I'm wearing today at Paul Smith. I mean, it was interesting for me because you were talking as you came into the business, the worldwide view of Paul Smith as well. There's a lot of interest from Asia, and dealing with that interest in Asia and different markets and appeasing those markets in a different continent.
Yeah, absolutely, and that comes with its own challenges as well. So I think it's always interesting when I sort of talk to people in other businesses when they're sort of UK-centric businesses. Yeah. But I think trying to expand that sort of technology strategy and implement it across a sort of across a global scale, as I'm sure you can imagine, kind of comes with a significant amount of overhead, a significant amount of challenges. You have to work through various degrees of complexity around the delivery of that. And that for me was always why it was key to kind of work with a partner and work with a technology provider that had that kind of global reach, that had that really clearly aligned sort of technology roadmap and would be able to deliver those sort of features and functionalities across that type of scale.
And before Paul Smith, you were in manufacturing, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So slightly different industry, so food and beverage. Yeah. So prior to my Paul Smith days, I used to work for Northern Foods. So I've literally, my entire career has always been IT, so I've literally gone through full life cycle management of IT. So I started off in operations with Northern Foods, moved into development, moved into analyst programming role, moved into a business analysis role, and then subsequently moved into IT management, and then obviously progressed with Paul Smith. So.
And now here at Rizhul.
Now here at Rizhul. So my role at Rizhul, again, a fantastic opportunity. Again, perfectly aligned in terms of industry. So Director of Retail. So again, it's an industry I'm really passionate about. It's an industry that I really enjoy working in. My entire career, again, obviously spent in retail. So yeah, really interesting.
So obviously I'm asking you to help me here around taking what we see in retail and all the learnings and what you're doing around building out solutions and trying to apply that to public sector, I guess. So the first question for you, I guess from me is, can you give us a perspective on the journey that you feel retail has gone on in the last few years, and particularly around the focus on the customer experience?
Sure.
And being really at the heart of customer experience, how technology is surrounding that.
I think this is a really interesting one for me, and I think the alignment is also really interesting and relevant as well. So I think everybody will be aware that from a retail perspective, there's a huge degree of change that's kind of undertaken through the industry, and it's predominantly been driven by e-commerce. So the digitisation, obviously, of retail, the shift in terms of channel. It wasn't necessarily an adoption process either for retail. I think it was a slow but sure progression of customer shift from, I guess, the traditional kind of in-store experience, the bricks and mortar experience. I think retail was one of those really early disruptive industries, and it was technology that disrupted that industry at a really early stage. Now, I think, again, one of the interesting elements, and having been fortunate enough, I think, to go through that evolution with an industry and with also a business, particularly one that was globally positioned as well. Initially, that interpretation was very much kind of focused on this is a new channel to market. So technology is actually bringing now a new channel to market. And I think for a certain period of time that was probably true. So there was a natural increase in sales. The business basically saw that there was a new channel of opportunity into market. I don't necessarily think that was readily realised, because unfortunately what happened was there was obviously a transitional balance. So as digital started to kind of become more prevalent, as people became more comfortable with providing payment details, procuring goods online, and so, you know, it became, I guess, somewhat of the norm. Subsequently, that had an adverse effect then in terms of their market share around wholesale. And what I mean from a wholesale perspective is that the business is obviously split retail and wholesale. Retail being sort of owned stores, and wholesale being basically provisioning and providing into major multiples, so other third-party stores fundamentally. Some of those being independent, and I think subsequently what happened was that there was an erosion at the bottom end of the market as digital started to kind of come in at the top. So a real shift. So retail, I think, has been a market that has been at the absolute edge of that digital transformation and change. I think it's been really fortunate that technology has actually driven retail, and it's driven some of the adoptions of those technologies and some of the adoption of those kind of channel shifts. But equally, it's had a slightly adverse effect in terms of it started to obviously change the profile and the dimension of the high street. I think everybody's aware of that. Again, you know, it's shifted. People's buying patterns, people's shopping patterns, they've all subsequently changed over a relatively short space of time.
I guess there's a couple of things in that, isn't there? One is, you know, you're talking about from an experience of something that's adopted and embraced digital with your experience and move things forward. We see on the high street where that hasn't happened as quickly. You know, we see that also all the time in terms of people taking a classic route to market, not changing with the times, not embracing this channel shift or multiple elements to the customer, and failing because of it.
Yeah, and again, I think, you know, I'm sure everybody will be relatively aware there have been various degrees of sort of successes and failures across the industry. It's not, unfortunately, it's not an entire story or position of success in that respect. You know, I think that industry has served to certainly shape the adoption of digital transformation. I think it's also given some significant lessons learned as well across that period of time. And again, this is why I feel personally really fortunate to kind of having been involved in that, having gone through certain projects around the delivery of certain e-commerce, payment integration, distribution. So obviously these are all elements of disruption that this has had an effect on. But you're absolutely right. Equally, I think from that respect, there are certain failures in that respect where retailers have either failed to change within a given period of time, they've either fallen out of favour, or they've kind of lost their market or interest share. And I think that's because they haven't even accurately understood the market change, or they haven't adopted it quick enough.
And the thing is, you know, also us as the public, the consumers, the consumerisation of IT, the demand that we're putting onto people. You talked about a lot of complicated things in the background that people won't even know is going on in the retail sector, because actually they don't care about it. They just want an easy experience, an easier experience of dealing with that retailer on their terms, whether it's sat in the armchair, on the high street, or any other way.
And I guess that in absolute essence is it's a choice environment. You choose whether you want to kind of interact with a retailer or with a brand, whether you kind of want to go into store and have that experience, or equally you kind of choose to shop on your device while you're sat at home watching television, or you're kind of sat and having some, I guess, time to start to do the things that are important to you as and when you want to do them.
So and obviously the competitive nature of that. We've seen people like ASOS, you know, move very, very quickly to a prominent market position. Even small startups, actually, you know. I was looking at a video the other day around something called Gymshark, some gym clothes, where this young people basically starting up a business. It's one of the fastest attributed businesses in the UK at the moment, just by selling gym clothes through all different manner of channels. So let me bring this back, because that's great. I'm really interested in this, and I'm interested for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons is the reason you're here, right? Is to take all of that knowledge and perspective that you've got around retail and this channel shift. How do we better serve our customers? But let's change that word to potentially customers into patients or students. How would you reflect on what you've learnt in retail and what you're doing now, and how that could potentially impact some of the public sector services that I know you're probably that serve you, right?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. So this is a debate I think that you and I have kind of had in terms of sort of a long-standing consideration, a long-standing discussion. So I think the relevancy here, and I think that people will be able to readily align these. So I think retail is obviously it's a choice engagement. It's a choice to go shopping. It's a choice whether you kind of go into a store, or it's a choice whether you kind of visit a website and you choose to kind of have some interaction with that brand or service. Likewise, I think from a public sector perspective, it's quite easy to almost apply those now everyday processes. And I think the point that I make around an everyday process is it's something that you're familiar with, it's something that you're comfortable with. And I think if the last 5 years have taught us anything, it's now that it's got to a point of stability where people kind of know and trust the technology. People are quite comfortable to kind of provide their credit card details. They're comfortable to provide their customer details and their preferences, because they choose which brands they want to interact with. If you take that customer experience as a life cycle of management and you start to apply that then to the public sector, so let's take an example of potentially healthcare. In many instances, you will have various interactions with, I guess, different services or different service providers in some respects. And I'm sure you know as well as I do that in many instances, you're not known as a single entity across some of those touch points.
It's a single point of care, really. You want a care instance.
And this is the whole strategy, and this is the whole focus around sort of customer experience. It's about trying to know you and use digital to kind of really maintain your profile as a single entity, so that your records are managed as a single point of entity. You can kind of have that knowledge and understanding then across all of those services in terms of you as one person, and having that interaction and that sort of, I guess, that digital experience then for the benefit of all of those services. So not necessarily having them split, not necessarily having the complexity in terms of the management, but having an aggregate that really kind of knows you with some intimacy and knows your profile and your service history, or in this instance, your healthcare history. So that can obviously be applied across public sector. There's varying degrees of how that experience can and probably should be applied in the future.
And you made the point earlier. I mean, there's a different perspective on this, where in retail you are choosing to have this experience. You are making the choice to have that experience. And in some cases that's the same in public sector. You're choosing to put in a planning application, or you're choosing a student experience at university. But sometimes choice is taken out of that. This is not a nice to have engagement. This is a need to have engagement, particularly if you think about some of the things that may be going on with care in the community, or cancer patients, or anything that's very, very critical in nature. And do you think any of the sensitivities around that needs to be taken into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, really, really pertinent points. I think the focus and the management of certainly critical data. So first and foremost, obviously, it's personal data potentially, so it has to be kind of managed accordingly. It certainly has to be kind of managed with the necessary diligence and security that's necessary to control and manage those types of record. I think the point I'm making really is that there are scales of efficiency. It's relatively simple to kind of almost take learnings from retail, and I don't trivialize this in any way. I appreciate that retail is very much a choice, it's a choice experience. Public sector, as you made the point, is often not. So potentially there are both two channels to market there. There's one that is a choice channel, in terms of certain instances, and there's one that's not around healthcare potentially and other sort of uses in that respect. But I think to apply that customer experience across both of those and use it as a model of efficiency, use it almost as a kind of life cycle management process to be able to kind of manage that model as efficiently as possible to give you, the customer, the best possible experience and outcome from that. And I think also, again, let's not take away, there's a key word here, and that's experience. It doesn't matter whether you are choosing to engage in a retail experience or whether you're choosing to engage in a level of healthcare. What you actually want to achieve from that is the best possible experience. And likewise, I think as a service provider, they want to make sure that you as a patient and or as a customer have the best experience with them. And I think it's important that customer relationship management fundamentally is key. It's potentially a term that is often overused. It's potentially a term that has quite a broad range of consideration. But I think it's at its lowest possible level. It's about making sure that you get the best possible customer experience from whatever that engagement is.
That's really important. An ex-boss of mine now works at the Department of Health. He used to talk about this concept, this Copernican shift. You know, Copernicus was the guy that said, you know, the world wasn't at the centre of the universe, it was the sun at the centre of the universe. And I think, you know, he talked about this Copernican shift in healthcare, i.e., you know, the patient needs to be in the centre of that universe, healthcare universe, not the establishment. I think if you widen that across public sector, then actually we have a citizen lifetime life cycle to manage, right? From birth and our interaction with some of the public sector services into childhood and education, and almost that experience being a lifetime journey. Because if there's certain things in that experience that we can pick up through that lifetime journey, then we might be able to make better decisions of where we manoeuvre that next, whether it's through childhood to adolescence, adolescence into adulthood into elderly. You know, we could be preempting the experience or the things that we should be drawing to those people in a proactive way. I guess I guess your perspective on that would be really good, because there's a lot of sensitivities in all of that, isn't there? You know, and what, in your experience, when you look at that retail, I mean, you've started to talk on this already, but what things would you caution or give particular attention to when you're going on this journey, given all of that in perspective, the public sector?
So I think one of the key criteria that you've highlighted there is efficiency.
Yeah.
So I think, again, where you were alluding to is kind of like, what's the most efficient method of management, and what's the most efficient method of support, I guess, in that respect. And again, I think for me that's about the aggregate. It's about knowing how to kind of aggregate that data, aggregate that position and knowledge of understanding on you as a customer and on the customer journey, sharing that as a single entity. Whereas I think at the moment a lot of, and again this is very much a kind of personal perspective, and it's led by personal experience, I think, to some degree. There's a lot of disparate data services around certain public sector services and interactions. So I think it's really challenging that there are separate services that don't necessarily know you as a single entity. They don't necessarily know you with any intimacy or as an individual. And I think it's very much about kind of applying learnings from the retail environment and potentially then starting to kind of share those in a much broader context, appreciating the sensitivity, as you said. It's a completely different use case, totally and utterly a completely different use case, and should be managed accordingly. It has to be managed with the right level of importance. I think, to your point around some of the cautionary learnings, for me it very much kind of focuses on change management and change control. So again, by its nature, what we're talking about is digital disruption. It's change to almost a traditional kind of pillar, engagement or experience. And I think by its nature, any level of transformational change or disruption has to be managed accordingly.
Yeah.
I think businesses can often be kind of, again, as we kind of referred to earlier, they can often be kind of be guilty of almost kind of sitting back and waiting to observe the change. It can sometimes be difficult to kind of point out the relevant benefits or accurately deliver an understanding in terms of why they should change. What's the benefit of that transformation? But with anything, by its very nature, transformation is a long-term process. It's not something that is quick to consider or equally quick to implement. it has to go through, I think, due diligence and consideration in terms of the outcome, the benefits, and certainly, obviously, from a public sector perspective, very much the return on the investment.
Yeah, and we mentioned it before, the sensitivities of this kind of X and Y axis, where X is where people have a choice of the services that they want to engage with in public sector, and Y being potentially where they don't have a choice. And like you say, sometimes the benefit or the value can be different across that axis as well, right? If you're giving somebody access to some critical information for a critical situation, you would think they would see the benefit and the value of that quickly. Equally, if you're giving them the ability to use technology to take care at home, the value of that would be seen almost immediately, you know what I mean? So,
and I think also what we're really talking about here is some commonality.
Yeah.
I think a point I made earlier to you is the fact that retail's gone through almost that kind of strategic change where people are now quite comfortable to kind of sit at home on their device, whether that's a laptop, a tablet, even a mobile now, and they're comfortable to interact, they're comfortable to share payment details, they're comfortable to share personal details around process, address, etc. I think taking that change now into the industry, starting to kind of appreciate that those will be the common technologies of interaction, that people will probably start to become a lot more comfortable with managing their personal data in that respect, potentially their healthcare in that respect. It's starting to be that kind of transformational process.
Yeah.
It's already taking place.
Yeah, it's been interesting that the interest you say about people trusting their bank details in that way. I've been in many a forum where I've talked about one of the Microsoft products called Health Vault, which is essentially your own online health bank account, where people were more skeptical about putting their details into their own health bank account than they were their own monetary bank account, which is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I think the other thing to take into consideration is, wearables is a massive market at the moment, and how those wearables are automatically feeding into a health bank account. Just as much you'd be gathering that information in terms of retail.
Yep.
Buying patterns. What's the next thing? When's your wife's birthday? All of those things have been taken into consideration. Those touch points have been, like you said, data. The intensity of the data and the touch points of the data are making it easy for us to be more proactive around where we put them next.
Absolutely, and I think people's familiarity is there. People's comfort levels are there. There aren't many more things that you would probably find are more challenging to a person to kind of A, put their financial details and kind of share those online, and B, obviously their personal details and potentially their health. But you're right, I think there's definitely a process of change. There's a digital shift in terms of people's expectation from digital, how they want to kind of choose in terms of their time and their effort. So it's very much more a kind of as and when they would like to consume the service, they want that service available to them. I think the next logical step on from that is, first and foremost, get and trust the technology. Once the technology is kind of stable and people are then starting to invest into it and use it, it's really about the consolidation of it. It's about making sure that it's fit for purpose, it's absolutely optimized, it's then starting to kind of reduce the complexity and obviously deliver the simplicity, and subsequently then it will start to reduce the overhead in terms of support. So appreciating that what we're talking about fundamentally is absolutely complex. It's a complicated set of IT services and
But simplicity is key.
Simplicity is key.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a step change on this, if I may. I'm going to transport you forward 10 years. Give me a view of what you think retail is going to be doing in 10 years. How are we going to be using technology? What's going to be the retail customer experience? And equally, how do you think that's going to impact kind of future public sector services?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I always enjoy those kind of like what if type of questions. How does this look, or how would this look in the future? My perspective on that is I think retail will continue to evolve. I think technology becomes more efficient, technology continues to become disruptive, it changes services, it drives service efficiency.
Yeah.
I think in that respect, it's seen hugely beneficial changes. I think if you asked anybody now, is their retail experience of today better than it was 5 years ago? I would probably argue that the majority of people would give you a positive, absolutely yes. And again, this is very much about delivering services and delivering optimized processes to you as an individual that are personal, that you choose to kind of set the parameters of engagement, They are suitable for you as and when you want to consume them. And I think this is, again, it's about a process of efficiency for me. You change and improve the services. They are at your discretion. You choose to consume them as and when you want, and you have absolute implicit trust in them. You trust your bank account details to them, you trust your personal details to them, you trust your family details to them.
So a lot more choice with the use of technology and a lot more integration when you make those choices.
Absolutely, and I can only see that evolving. So I think, again, you were talking earlier about kind of starting to measure personal details around people's health and improving how they choose to live their life, how they choose to kind of set their exercise regimes, their diet, etc. So again, taking those learnings, taking that life cycle management and customer experience, applying that into then, I guess, more of those important and critical elements of certainly public sector and everyday life, I guess. For me, I can only see that improving and becoming more prevalent. So I think the digital transformation is in its very early stages of implementation and adoption. I think people are at a stage now where they know and they trust the technology, and now it's very much about kind of shaping how it will certainly now look for the next 5 to 10 years.
So it's interesting, we had Microsoft in yesterday talking about things like machine learning. And it's fascinating the technology that's there already in terms of facial recognition to give you some kind of age or to say whether you're happy or not. You know, crowd recognition, look at to get some sentiment back from the crowd. You know, interesting, you're talking about how we proactively go into that service and make our own choices, but equally in public sector, where we think about those machine learning scenarios, people only know what they know, right? So how do you see that kind of that machine learning giving us a view when you rock up to a place and kind of go, okay, I know it's you, Tim, I know you're 43, I can see from the look in your eye that you've got something X, Y and Z maybe that needs to be looked at. I can see that you're happy or sad, all that, you know, all that kind of, how does that kind of work into your future thoughts?
So that's really interesting for me. So I think by its very nature, and I can see you obviously kind of really, you know, you're really animated and really kind of like excited, I guess, about starting to now discuss those types of technologies. So those are kind of, you know, at this point in time, I guess those are sort of boundary technologies. But again, even they are now starting to become a little bit more prevalent. The technology's starting to kind of be improved. I think interestingly for me, certainly around a retail focus, the capability of being able to introduce those types of technologies probably through IoT strategies, so Internet of Things strategies. So really where you can start to join the dots fundamentally. And this is where I think it will all slowly but surely start to come together. Again, a point I alluded to earlier is that this is a transformation we're talking about. It's not an overnight off and on scenario. It's very much a progressive development of technology adoption. Some technologies fall by the wayside, as you know. Some of them aren't adopted. They're not readily fit for purpose. And certain technologies obviously kind of go through that process of evolution where they subsequently kind of become really, really feature rich. They become of significant value and they find their space in the market. Machine learning, I think, is critical and key. I think we will see machine learning applied into various industries with various different use cases. I think IoT joins all of the dots for me. It starts to become the mechanism by which they are delivered. But fundamentally, I don't think we'll see a significant change. I think what we'll see is we'll just see the service offering and solution broaden. So these are not, I don't think these are significant change points. These are very soft and subtle processes and progressions of that technology being evolved and being specific into certain use cases. Retail, I think, has got a great opportunity to adopt all of that. Because I think it's focused on the customer, it's focused on you as an individual. It's about everything and anything that you've just suggested. So retail already kind of currently tracks certain metrics on you. So they know your footfall, they know you as an individual. If you carry some level of loyalty, again, more often than not, it's potentially not digital at this point in time. It's possibly a piece of plastic. But again, they can choose to sort of track your interactions. Now, it's not that much of a further step forwards to start to really be able to then kind of influence your experience into that store. Knowing that you're probably going to arrive in advance, knowing what you're actually there for, knowing who you're coming with, and knowing where you've been previously, slowly but surely we can start to really build up some life cycle management around you as an individual and influence how your experience will will subsequently be delivered.
You know what? That's exactly the reason why I wanted you here today, to explain that. Because all of the things that you've talked about there, I think, are absolutely the journey that public sector is on at the moment. You know, all of those things to have in the centre of all of that the patient, student, citizen, public experience at its heart. So I'm really pleased that I've had some time to speak to you today.
Likewise.
I know we've been having these conversations privately, now it's on film. Thank you for your time.
No, likewise, thank you very much, it's been a pleasure.
So thank you for joining us on this public sector broadcast again. As you know, this is a series, so I would ask that you try to look out on our YouTube channel for the other public sector broadcasts that we've done. We'd really appreciate your comments, and please obviously do share and like if you can for us. Thanks again.